Welcome. I'm Lark Mason, and I'm the moderator for this evening's presentation, Celestial City, Newport and China. And we are pleased today to introduce to you a new member of Asia Week, a new museum member, which is the Preservation Society of Newport County. And what could be better than an inaugural presentation that has to do with China and the influence that it had through Newport, not just in Rhode Island and that immediate area, but for all sorts of trade that took place between the United States and other countries and China that still resonate today. Our presenters today are Dr. Nicole Williams, who is the curator of collections for the Preservation Society of Newport County. She is a specialist in American art, material culture of the 18th and 19th century. She received her Bachelor of Science degree from Harvard University and her doctorate from Yale. Nikki will be followed by Dr. Bing Huang, who is an assistant professor of art history at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island, and is a specialist in Chinese painting and Chinese works of art. She received her Master of Philosophy from the University of Cambridge and her doctorate from Harvard University. So the Preservation Society of Newport County was founded in 1945 by a very small group of women in Newport, Rhode Island, in an effort to save the rapidly vanishing collection of colonial structures in the city. Over time, that emphasis on that colonial architectural heritage shifted to include important architectural features and homes and other buildings that were built throughout the 18th and into the 19th century and what we know of as the Gilded Age. And as I mentioned the Gilded Age, I encourage you to watch if you want to see a highlight of some of the interiors of the Preservation Society's holdings. Watch HBO's special with Julian Fellowes, The Gilded Age, which is really marvelous because it brings you right into the mansions as they were inhabited back during the turn of the century, from the 19th into the early 20th century. So there were many families in Newport that were engaged in commercial activities with China. We're going to learn about some of them. And the presentation today will begin with Nicole, followed by Bing, and then we will come back for a brief question and answer period where I will be directing some of the questions and some of the background information that we'd love to share with you. It's also important to note that you can become a member of the Preservation Society of Newport County. And when you are, you're going to be receiving information about the many, many, many wonderful programs that take place on a year-round basis. This happens to be focused on Asia because of the importance of Asia Week, and we are hosting it through Asia Week New York. But they have programs on every kind of subject that you can imagine, and we encourage you to be a participant and to go and visit. The same is true for Asia Week. We are right now starting off our series of events that take place this fall, and we encourage you to go online and come in person to visit the many excellent international dealers who have astounding collections of items that they have brought from all over the world here to share with you in New York City. And without further ado, Nikki, it's your turn.
Well, thank you, Lark, for that very kind introduction. And thanks to the Asia Week team for inviting Bing and me to speak tonight. We're very excited to share more about our new exhibition at the Preservation Society called The Celestial City, Newport and China. The show just opened in our newly restored mansion, Rosecliff, on famed Bellevue Avenue. And we hope you'll have the opportunity to see the show before it closes on February 11th and to admire historic Rosecliff restored to its former Gilded Age glory. And in Newport, you can also visit our other landmark properties like the Breakers and Marble House, As Lark mentioned, the Preservation Society is one of America's greatest collections of house museums, packed with art treasures from the colonial era through the Gilded Age. And they're all nestled closely and conveniently together within our spectacular seaside city. The Celestial City brings together more than 100 dazzling works from the Preservation Society's collection and other institutions in a range of media, from paintings, sculptures, prints and photographs, to fashion and ceramics, lacquerwares, and lanterns. These objects reveal China's deep influence on Newport from the 18th century through the Gilded Age. In this time, Newport developed from a bustling seaport in the British Empire into America's premier summer playground, while the fall of China's last imperial dynasty transformed the ancient nation. From the 18th century through the Gilded Age, generations of Newporters looked to China for knowledge, beauty, fortune, and freedom. In turn, many different people of Chinese heritage, including artists, merchants, sailors, immigrant entrepreneurs, and women suffragists, shaped all aspects of life in Newport. My primary goals for the exhibition were to uncover and celebrate their contributions. I wanted to push beyond what we knew previously about local participation in the China trade and the local fashion for Chinese goods, to reveal how Chinese and Chinese American individuals transformed Newport's culture, its politics, and its economy. Simply put, they transformed the fabric of our city. I chose to title the exhibition The Celestial City to capture this closeness between Newport and China. You probably know that in the 18th century, China became known to Westerners as the Celestial Empire, a translation from the Chinese term Tian Chao, meaning heavenly dynasty. Reigning dynasties throughout China's history believed their sovereign had a mandate from heaven. But did you know that in the Gilded Age, Americans also viewed Newport as a celestial place? The lofty status of its wealthy summer residents and the otherworldly beauty of the resort town caused Victorian visitors to dub the city Celestial Newport. Humorist Mark Twain described Newport as, quote, far away towards the rising sun, astronomically remote. China and Newport share not only artistic, social, and business connections, but also an identity as heavenly worlds. Today, I want to take you on a whirlwind tour through our new exhibition. We'll explore the lure of trade in Gallery 1, the Chinese community of Gilded Age Newport in Gallery 2, Gilded Age collecting practices in Gallery 3, and in Gallery 4, the final gallery, we'll re-examine an iconic building in Newport, the Chinese Tea House at Marble House, and dive into the stories of Chinese women suffragists who inspired its construction. So we'll begin in Gallery 1, where we explore the flourishing trade that existed between Newport and China from the 1700s through the 1870s. By the mid-1700s, Newport was a bustling colonial seaport connected to China through complex trade networks. Although the British government forbade colonists from directly trading with China, Newporters obtained a range of goods through trade controlled by the English East India Company, as well as other legal and extra-legal means. We know that Newporters especially prized tea, silk, and porcelains. And so we open the show with this beautiful display of Chinese porcelains owned by early Newport families. At bottom left, we have a monogrammed teacup and plate made in Canton for the Robinson family. Cantonese merchants fulfilled overseas orders for porcelain customized with monograms and insignia. Merchant Yam Xinghua placed this notice for porcelains customized with regalia in the Providence Gazette in 1804. It's the very earliest advertisement placed by a Chinese merchant in any American publication, and it shows the marketing savvy of Chinese merchants and the importance of the Rhode Island market, which included Providence, Bristol, and Newport. In Newport, 35% of local estates listed porcelains from China by the 1770s. A French chaplain who was stationed here in 1781 observed, quote, "There is not a single person to be found who does not drink out of Chinese cups and saucers." In the China Trade Gallery, we also have stunning examples of early Newport furniture inspired by Chinese art and design. We're very lucky to have on loan from the Redwood Library the exceptional tall case clock you see at the right, which was owned by the Stanton family of Newport. It has works by famed local clockmaker William Claggett and a japanned case that was probably made in Boston. At the time, Boston had a robust japanning industry, but other forms were japanned more locally in Newport. An example are these wall panels in the parlor of Vernon House, now a property of the Newport Restoration Foundation. The entire parlor of Vernon House was painted with imagined Chinese scenes at some point in the 1720s, and that makes Vernon House an exceptionally rare example of large-scale architectural japanning. We're also extremely lucky to have on loan from the Winterthur Museum this exquisite china table by Newport cabinet maker John Townsend. I use this term china table because that was the period expression for a table designed to hold porcelain and other equipment for the tea service. The Chinese style fretwork on the tabletop, stretchers, and brackets was a fashionable form of chinoiserie decoration in 18th century Newport. After the Revolutionary War, Newport merchants were eager to capitalize on the opening of direct trade between the new United States and China. Many of you know that the Empress of China was the earliest merchant ship to sail for China from the new nation. It sailed from New York Harbor in February 1784. But Newporters, we learned, were not far behind. The ship Hydra, owned by Newporter Christopher Champlin, also sailed for Canton and Bengal in 1784, although it got waylaid in India and never made it to Canton. The Hydra would have been only the second American ship in Canton had it reached its intended destination. In these early years, though, most local merchants invested in voyages that were run by syndicates from other cities. And it was really in the mid-19th century that Newporters' trade with China took off. Merchant families like the Wetmores and the Kings made vast fortunes in China that allowed them to retire comfortably to Newport. In the exhibition, we show a wide range of objects collected in China by the Wetmores and Kings. I'll start with the collections of China trade merchant William Shepherd Wetmore, who founded the firm Wetmore and Company in 1834. He used his fortune amassed in China to build this stately Newport villa you see on the right called Chateau-sur-Mer. Chateau-sur-Mer is now a house museum owned and operated by the Preservation Society. Chateau, according to a neighbor, held, quote, many strange and interesting things from China. Although the property's contents were dispersed at auction in the 1960s, the Preservation Society is lucky to have a few Chinese treasures original to the house, and we're always hunting for more, so if you find anything, please let us know. An example is this intricate cigar box made for Mr. Wetmore. You can see the lid on top right has a W for Wetmore in the center, and there's a rocky island landscape on the lid's underside. The sides of the box show scenes from daily life. We also have this gorgeous silk and copper dragon robe. It was probably purchased by William Wetmore's son, George Peabody Wetmore, after the 1911 Chinese Revolution, when imperial-style garments like this one began to flood the Western market. In the China Trade Gallery, we also feature King family collections from their Newport mansion, Kingscote. Kingscote, which you see on the left, was home to multiple generations of the family and is now another Preservation Society house museum. Multiple generations of the Kings were partners in Russell and Company, the most powerful American mercantile firm trading in China. First to seek their fortunes abroad were Edward King and his brother, William Henry King. Their nephew, David King Jr., followed. All three men collected Chinese furniture, paintings, and other decorative wares, which we show in the exhibition with the proviso that these luxuries were obtained with the family fortune made through heavy investment in the opium trade. Russell and Company was a major dealer in opium, which ravaged China's society and economy. One of the most captivating pieces from Kingscote is this massive painting of Canton Harbor, attributed to Yuqua and purchased there by William Henry King. Canton, of course, was the most significant treaty port in southern China. This painting depicts its bustling harbor and business area lined with foreign hongs. It's actually one of a pair of large panoramic views of Canton that has long adorned the Kingscote Library. There, the massive pictures create an immersive viewing environment that simulates the travel experience. And I'll just show you briefly a few more slides that demonstrate the breadth of the family's collecting. The Kings collected the gaming items that you see on the left and the cloisonné vessels visible at right. The central cavorting dragon is an incense clock from their collection, and the silver vessel to its left is a rosewater sprinkler sold to David King by Wang Hing, the era's most prolific exporter of Chinese silver. We also have this rare photo album from David King's travels in China. We opened it to two scenes of Rose Hill, the Hong Kong mansion of trader Warren Delano Jr. Delano was a business partner of the Kings and the future grandfather of President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The photograph at right is, to my knowledge, the only known picture of Rose Hill's drawing room. Its large scale, you can see its cavernous soaring ceilings, was typical of the homes of wealthy American traders in China. David King Jr. left China to return home to Newport in 1874. So he was the last of the King family in China. And when he returns in the 1870s, he's returning at the start of the American Gilded Age. And that's exactly where we continue the story in the next gallery of the exhibition, which is devoted to the experiences of Chinese immigrants in Gilded Age Newport. Gallery 2 shares never before told stories from Newport's Gilded Age Chinese community. By carefully combing archives and locating and interviewing descendants, we learn that more than 60 Chinese-owned businesses opened in Newport between 1876 and 1915. Hardworking and resilient Chinese immigrants had bustling shops at central locations in Newport on Thames Street and Broadway, Spring Street and Duke Street. They enriched these neighborhoods' diversity and spirit of interdependence. In this gallery, we've gathered together a dozen photographs of Chinese laundries and restaurants, along with the inspiring stories of their proprietors. One particularly inspiring story is that of Li Yun, a laundry owner who opened his first shop on Newport's Thames Street, which is really the main artery in town, in 1890. That laundry only closed in 1942. It was open for more than 50 years. And I find that to be just an incredibly uplifting example of Chinese entrepreneurial success. We emphasize in the exhibition that Chinese migration to Newport is largely a story of success against the odds. It's a story of courage, of ingenuity, and of immigrants' perseverance. Chinese residents faced great hardships, to be sure. We talk about the unjust immigration laws and rampant racism in Newport that Chinese immigrants faced as they forged new lives. Chinese immigrants in Newport were targets for assaults, for police raids, and property destruction, all of which we found reported in local newspapers. But Chinese Newporters also built thriving businesses and transformed the city's culture. And another example are these early Chinese restaurants that introduced new flavors, ingredients, and cooking methods that shook up the Anglo culinary tradition that was so dominant in cities like Newport. And some early Chinese immigrants married and raised children here. Through genealogical research, we were lucky to find the living descendants of one local family. Here you see Terrence Lee at our recent exhibition opening. And Terrence is the grandson of a man named Gum Lee, one of Newport's earliest Chinese residents. Gum ran a laundry business on Fame Street and was also a devoted family man. In a video feature that plays in the gallery, Terrence graciously shares Gum's story with us, reflecting on how his grandfather persevered and paved the way for generations of his family. In this gallery, we also take the opportunity to illuminate hidden connections between our venue Rosecliff and the Chinese American experience. The opulence of Rosecliff Mansion was made possible by Chinese labor in the American West. Heiress Tessie Fair Ulrichs built Rosecliff with wealth from her father, James Graham Fair, a Western railroad and mining magnate who employed many Chinese workers. Around 1850, thousands of Chinese men moved to the American West, drawn by the gold rush. They were seeking better lives for themselves and their families. They found work building railroads, clearing land, and mining gold and silver. The Fair family fortune and Rosecliff itself were built on their hard work and determination. As violence and discrimination exploded out west, many of these men moved eastwards to cities like Newport. We found in our research that the first ever Chinese business in Newport was Hua Sing's Chinese California Laundry, opened at 198 Thames Street in 1876. Hua Sing likely came from California. This advertisement for his laundry business is an incredible document that marks the moment the Chinese diaspora from the West Coast set roots here in Newport. And at the same time that Chinese immigrants were moving to Newport in large numbers, Newport's industrial elites were avidly collecting antique Chinese art and chinoiserie. Our third gallery on Gilded Age collecting gathers impressive works collected by Newport's Gilded Age elites, like the Van Allen family and the Vanderbilts. The Gilded Age was an era of extravagant wealth in Newport. Industrial tycoons amassed riches and strove to outdo each other in the magnificence of their homes. They spent lavishly to acquire antique Chinese art and chinoiserie objects that had adorned the great palaces and estates of Europe. Through such acquisitions, Newporters announced themselves as a new American nobility to rival Europe's old aristocracy. The large case pieces you see in this gallery photo all have European pedigree, and they were all owned by Harold and Gertrude Vanderbilt. The Japan secretary in the center is English. And on the left, you can just spy a Japanese cabinet. French inscriptions indicate it was in a French collection. And although it's Japanese, we decided to include it in the show because the Vanderbilts mistook the cabinet on stand as Chinese. They were collectors, we point out, not true connoisseurs. Elsewhere in this gallery, we discuss the lavish breakfast room at the Elms, another Preservation Society property that was once the summer home of coal magnate Edward Berwind. Around 1901, French decorator Jules Lallard installed antique Chinese lacquer panels in the breakfast room. We think that Allard salvaged them from a demolished Parisian townhouse, and he also provided an additional modern panel and chinoiserie furniture to match. Many Newporters in this period felt condescension towards China. America's rapid industrialization in the late 19th century and related technological and scientific developments like electricity had fueled a spirit of progress that often expressed itself in derision towards China's supposedly less advanced culture. To tell this aspect of the story, we've gathered 3 electrified lamps from our properties, all with Chinese sculptural bases. And here's a close-up view of the lamp at the right depicting a windswept immortal. These lamps were retailed by specialty dealers of Asian art, like Edward Farmer and Yamanaka and Company, that opened in New York and Newport in the early 1900s. Sellers touted the lamp's mystical Eastern ambiance, the mystical quality of the light created by the lamps, which implied that China was mysterious and backwards. By contrast, consumers understood electricity to be a new American innovation that exemplified the modernity of the US. The last gallery in the exhibition, it's admittedly my favorite, and that's because it re-examines and really transforms what we think about the Chinese tea house at Marble House, which is a crown jewel of the Preservation Society. In 1912, Newport social leader and suffragist Alva Belmont, who you see on the right, commissioned architects Hunt and Hunt to build a Chinese tea house overlooking the sea at her Newport estate, Marble House. Alva opened the tea house for a major women's suffrage conference in 1914, and she continued to host suffrage meetings in the tea house until the outbreak of World War I. For a long time, the Chinese tea house was interpreted as an architectural folly, inspired by the simple fact that chinoiserie decoration was in vogue at the time. I thought there might be more to the story, so we started looking for deeper connections between Alva's suffragism and Chinese history. What we found was an incredible untold story about how heroic Chinese and Chinese American suffragists, like Mabel Lee, who you see on the left, inspired Alva's political activism and the building of the Chinese tea house. In 1912, US suffrage leaders heard rumors that Chinese women had won the right to vote in the newly formed Republic of China. American newspapers described how Chinese women had fought bravely in the revolution that overthrew China's last emperor and petitioned successfully for suffrage. These reports were somewhat overblown. Women had been enfranchised in China in one province only, and the government soon rescinded their right. But US suffrage leaders were energized by the news, and they started reaching out to Chinese women in their own communities for advice on how to gain the vote, and they invited them to speak at meetings. This New York Times photograph from April 1912 shows Alva Belmont and her colleagues meeting with 7 Chinese women at a seminal suffrage conference held at the Pekin restaurant in Manhattan. Chinese American student Mabel Pinghua Lee, she was only 16 years old at the time. You can see her confidently addressing the crowd from the speaker's platform. And to the right, Alva Belmont listens with rapt attention. I've circled her unmistakable profile, which rises out of the crowd. On May 4th, so this is about a month later, Chinese women also joined a great suffrage parade through New York City. Mabel led the way on horseback. You can see Mabel Lee at left in the newspaper montage, and Alva Belmont is the woman standing opposite Mabel on the right. So the newspaper montage frames them both as leaders of the parade and leaders of the movement. In the Tea House Gallery at Rosecliff, we feature original designs for the Chinese tea house, alongside objects that honor Chinese American women's contributions to the suffrage movement. The delicate drawing on your screen is one of 4 original watercolor renderings of the tea house by architects Hunt and Hunt. It's a loan from the Library of Congress and has never been exhibited before. And this photograph shows a nearby display with writings and portraits of Mabel Lee and another inspirational Chinese American suffragist present at that Pekin restaurant meeting, whose name was Grace Yip Taipond. The man you see on the left is Doug Chu, and he's Grace's great-grandson. And Doug lent precious family heirlooms to our exhibition, including these 2 stunning portraits of Grace Yip Taipond and her family. Another fantastic loan to the exhibition is this suffrage banner from the Huntington Library. It's also never been exhibited before. The banner was carried in the 1912 suffrage parade. On the right, you see Anna Howard Shaw, who was the president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, or NASA, on the banner, carrying the banner in the 1912 parade. And the banner's slogan, NASA Catching Up with China, suggested that the US was behind China in the matter of women's suffrage. It was imploring viewers to catch up, to catch up with China in the matter of women's suffrage. And the banner's beautiful blue-green color simultaneously evoked Chinese jades and Celadon pottery. I'll end my talk now by showing you a magnificent contemporary artwork in the exhibit that we included to help us shed new light on the past. This series of large-scale lanterns was created by Boston-based artist Yu Wenwu, specially for the Celestial City. Yu Wenwu's 5 lanterns illuminate, literally and figuratively, the themes of Chinese immigration to the American West and onto Newport, which is the subject of her lantern at the top left. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I'm hovering over the bluish lantern at top left. And then moving clockwise down the spiral, the next lantern explores the theme of trade in Chinese commodities that grew Newport's wealth. And then the third lantern, the one close to the mirror, explores the theme of Chinese entrepreneurship in Newport. And then the fourth lantern, circling behind, reflects on the painful legacy of the Chinese Exclusion Act and ongoing anti-Asian hate and violence. And the last lantern, the lantern all the way at the back left, celebrates Chinese American contributions to the US women's suffrage movement. Yu Wen skillfully combined historic Newport images with scenes of Chinese migration, labor, exclusion, and community from all across the United States. Her lanterns weave together complex themes to honor Chinese contributions to Newport and the modern Chinese diaspora of Rhode Island. In that sense, the lanterns embody our mission for the exhibition, which was to range widely to tell untold stories, elevate new voices, and show how central China was and remains to the celestial city of Newport. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending today's talk. And thank you, Lark, for the gracious introduction, and to Asia Week New York for providing this platform. It has been an honor to contribute my expertise to this exhibition, above all the cherished friendship I've developed with Nikki through this journey. Our exhibition is set against a backdrop of enduring fascination between the US and China, and more broadly, the West and East. This fascination, deeply rooted in history, is most vividly manifested in the art and artifacts, meticulously crafted and fervently amassed over the centuries. This dance of mutual fascination, stretching across time, forms the tapestry of our exhibition. Our show is at the second floor of the Rosecliff Mansion. As you venture upstairs to see the exhibition, you will see this long hallway, and you will be greeted by 2 oil portraits of the Chinese home merchant Wu Bingjian. The portrait to the left is estimated to date back to around 1840. It was gifted to William Henry King by the merchants of Russell Company upon his retirement in 1849. William Henry King bought Kingscote in 1864, a landmark of the Gothic revival style in American architecture. The King family retained ownership until 1972, at which point the final descendant bequeathed it to the Preservation Society of Newport County. The piece on the right was acquired from China by William Henry King's elder brother, Edward King, in 1844, and is attributed to George Chinnery. Edward King, the pioneer among the King brothers in China, shared a deep friendship with Wu Bingjian. While numerous variations of the portrait on the left exist and on the right exist too, this one on the right is the sole rendition depicting Wu Bingjian in the full length without a cross-legged stance. The portrait on the left is a piece created by Cantonese studio of Lan Gua, Chinese name Guan Qiaochang, in emulation of the style of Lan Gua's mentor, George Chenry, an English painter who spent most of his life in China. Wu Bingjian, whose life spanned from 1769 till 1843, was arguably the wealthiest man on earth in the 19th century. His investment of a staggering $500,000 to American railroads, in collaboration with John Murray Forbes, coupled with his decision to delegate the management of all his overseas investment to foreign acquaintances, underscores a degree of reciprocal trust that transcends conventional expectations. Yet, despite his stature, he found himself, much like many of today's Chinese business tycoons, at the mercy of forces beyond his control. Government drained commercial profits, viewing merchants as a wellspring of wealth to be tapped through fines, sometimes fabricated. After almost single-handedly paying the fines to the British following the Opium War in 1842, he also lost his Guangzhou trade monopoly. Reflecting on this, he wrote to his friend Robert Forbes, "If I were young now, I would seriously consider taking a ship to America and settling somewhere near you." Presented here is a rare letter written by Wu Bingjian. We can see his elegant handwriting. This document not only showcases his linguistic proficiency, but also underscores that in addition to his mainstay as a home merchant, Wu Bingjian undertook considerable independent business ventures. Displayed here is a unique cash payment receipt adorned with the trading signature of Wu Bingjian, known as Hougua. The name Hougua represents a romanization of his business name, Haoguan, derived from his native Hokkien language. This artifact is dated December 28, 1811, from Canton and is completed by a corresponding translation in Chinese calligraphy. Thomas Allen, an English painter, depicted China with romantic and mystical undertones in this print, The Dinner Party at a Mandarin House. Such gatherings were common as home merchants often hosted foreigners in their elegant country estates surrounded by gardens. These home merchants were an elite group granted exclusive trading rights with Westerners since the 16th century. Despite governmental constraints, mutual respect flourished between Chinese and foreign merchants. Many Westerners viewed home merchants as trustworthy and astute. Another artwork I would like to introduce you today is a self-portrait sculpture by the eminent American sculptor and art patron Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, founder of the Whitney Museum of American Art in New York City. Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney grew up in New York City, but spent her summers in Newport at the family's summer home, the Breakers. Today, if you visit Breakers, you can visit the room she used to stay. And she modeled herself as a Chinese Buddhist deity and named the sculpture Chinoise, French for Chinese woman. This piece is the original plaster sculpture from which a limestone and two bronze versions were later crafted. The limestone variant is at the Whitney Museum of American Art's permanent collection, New York City. This self-portrait blends Art Nouveau with Chinese Buddhist sculpture elements. The fashionable bob cut of her hair is contemporary for its time, yet in this 1913 portrayal, she embodies a Buddhist deity, her closed eyes and tranquil smile suggesting a rise above worldly matters. In this image from the exhibit, we present a juxtaposition of two sculptures. This bronze sculpture of Guanyin is emblematic of the inspiration behind Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney's adjacent chinoiserie piece. This sculpture of Gertrude draws from iconography commonly linked with figures such as Maitreya, Shakyamuni, Amitabha, and Dipankara. As evident, I'm setting her alongside two Buddhist statues for comparison. She mimics the same mudra, posture, and drapery akin to the statue on her right. This gesture, known as Abhaya Mudra, symbolizes reassurance and protection. Notably, her stance on the lotus petal mirrors the one displayed on this slide's left. Further, her attire resembles a Buddhist monk robe, reminiscent of drapery often associated with figures like Guanyin and Shakyamuni. Another interesting thing to notice is that Gertrude is wearing Mary Jane shoes, in stark contrast to the majority of Buddhist sculptures, which don't typically have shoes and are usually barefoot. While it may not be a direct influence on Gertrude, the manner in which she sculpted her drapery evokes echoes of Gandhara sculptures. While Gertrude likely drew inspiration from East Asian Buddhist sculptures, her Western education imbues her work with echoes of earlier Gandhara art. The drapery of the Buddhist monastic robe in her sculpture evokes the finesse of classical and Hellenistic periods of Greece. Although Gertrude named the sculpture chinoise rather than Guanyin, the sculpture has evoked a dichotomy of reactions from its audience. A segment of the audience lauds its avant-garde interpretation, perceiving it as an homage to Buddhist traditions. In stark contrast, some contend that Gertrude's portrayal through the appropriation of Buddhist iconography veers towards the presumptuous, subtly suggesting a lofty self-equivalent to esteemed Buddhist deities. In Gertrude's defense, it's not uncommon artistic endeavor for artists to infuse their self-portraits with divine undertones, modeling personal identity with ethereal attributes in a refined manner. A quintessential example is Albrecht Dürer's renowned self-portrait from 1500, which bears striking parallels to the preceding depictions of Christ. One cannot overlook its alignment with the conventions of religious paintings, the meticulous symmetry, the profound dark tonalities, and the poignant manner in which Dürer engages the viewer, positioning his hand at his chest midpoint. I would also like to draw your attention to this garden seat from Chateau Soumet, French phrase for that translate as castle by the sea, owned by Wetmore family. This garden seat encapsulates various episodes from the Chinese drama 西厢记, The Tale of the Western Chamber. Upon closer inspection, you'll notice the seat's hexagonal design, with each of its 6 facades representing a distinct scene from the tale. It is noteworthy that the top of this ceramic seat was once adorned with an additional scene. However, the consistent use and the weight of those who rested on it have led to the fading of the upper enamel, attesting to its frequent use. The story of Western Chamber stands as one of the most celebrated Chinese dramas, crafted by the Yuan Dynasty playwright Wang Shifu, set against the backdrop of the Tang Dynasty. The narrative delves into the clandestine romance between Zhang Shen, a young scholar whose name translates to student Zhang, and Cui Ying, the daughter of a prominent minister from Tang court. Over the centuries, artists have employed diverse and innovative methods to depict the tale of Western Chamber. Throughout my presentation today, I will reference paintings and prints from the Ming and Qing dynasties to illustrate this story for you. The narrative starts at Puzhou Temple, a Buddhist monastery where Ying and her mother take respite. They lodged there both to mourn and pray for Ying's late father as they transported his coffin to the ancestral home. As women of high nobility, it was customary for them to seek refuge in temples, benefiting from the added privacy and tranquility these sanctuaries provided. Notably, Ying, celebrated for her beauty, also found sanctuary at the temple from local bandits drawn to her allure. On the other hand, Zhang Shen was a scholar from a modest family who aspired to become a scholar official in the government. He was making a stop on his way to the capital to take the civil examination. Once he passed the exam, Zhang Shen could acquire a position in either local bureau or the central court, gradually rising in status. This was a common goal for every scholar in the Imperial China. But at the moment, Zhang Shen was taking a pit stop on the way to visit a childhood friend, General DuQue, who was stationed not far away. As General Du Que had mentioned the renowned scenery at Puzhou Temple, Zhang went to pay a visit. As it happened, Zhang Shen was blessed with more than great scenery during his stay. It was love at first sight when he encountered Ying Ying for the first time within the temple grounds, accompanied by her servant. However, Zhang Shen was prevented from expressing his feelings as Ying Ying was under her mother's watchful eye. I'd like to draw attention to this Mingqiji print from Cologne that captures this pivotal moment within the confines of a fishbowl. Zhang Shen was able to read poems as he lingered on the outer wall of her chamber. Despondent, he let his feelings flow ceaselessly and was eventually reciprocated by Ying on the other side of the wall. Soon the Flying Tiger, a local bandit who Ying was avoiding, soon dispatched the bandits to surround the monastery in an effort to abduct her. Ying was in a vulnerable position as her father just passed away, and there was only several ladies accompanying her on the journey. Distraught, Ying's mother agreed that whoever drove the bandits away could have Ying's hand in marriage. Seeing this opportunity, Zhang Shen contacted his friend General Du Que, whom successfully subdued the bandits. In this Mingqiji print on right, the act is masterfully portrayed within a lantern reminiscent of a carousel. This design vividly conveys the dynamic movement of General Du Que's army. Just as it seemed that Zhang Shen and Cui Ying were set to be married, Ying's mother expressed reservations about her earlier pledge to Zhang Shen. The Cui family had a long-standing tradition of not welcoming commoners. She then revealed that Ying was already promised to the son of a distinguished official. The two young lovers were greatly disappointed and pined away in their unrequited love. Fortunately, Ying's maid, Hong Niang, initially was sent by Ying's mother to spy on her daughter, took pity on the couple, and served as a messenger to arrange the secret unions between the two. Nowadays, the term Hong Niang refers to matchmaker who help facilitate the pursuit of romantic relationships. When Ying's mother discovered what her daughter had done, she reluctantly consented to a formal marriage on one condition: Zhang Shen must travel to the capital and pass the civil examination. In this scene, Zhang Shen departs from the capital to undertake his examination, leading to a heartfelt farewell. To the joy of the young lovers, Zhang Shen proves to be a brilliant scholar and was quickly appointed to high office. The story ends a happy note as the two were finally married. I'd like to underscore that the practice of amalgamating diverse episodes into a singular artwork emerged as a distinctive innovation in 18th century China, as is evident in the print to the left, from which I draw several sections to illustrate the story for you so far. Similarly, a finely crafted vase at the Victorian Albert Museum in London beautifully displays 24 episodes from the narrative on its exterior. The last piece I would like to talk about today is this exquisite trio of lacquer tables, emblematic of the craftsmanship characteristic of the 19th century Chinese export era. This piece is from Kingscote. You can see the monogrammed DK here. Stands for David King, one of the King brothers who went to China. These tables, believed to originate from Guangzhou, carry the intricate design influences of early 19th century English stackable nesting tables. Specifically crafted for the export market, they epitomize the nuanced aesthetics and profound cultural exchange that define this pivotal epoch in Sino-Western interactions. The attention to details become apparent in the pierced end support with splayed legs ending in gilded claw toes. The table surface command attention with their hand scroll-shaped illustrations. Their vibrancy resonating with the spirited dynamism found in the renowned Chinese long hand scroll painting along the river during Qingming Festival and its subsequent renditions. The tabletop depicts a three-dimensional visualization of this kind of long hand scroll, with a portion open and the rest folded. This part looks like the end of a hand scroll with a rod in it. The depicted scene bears a resemblance to the painting showcased on the right, representing just a fragment of its entirety as well. The original artwork stretches for several meters long. The subtle indications of a scroll here at the corner suggest a continuation beyond the visible segment, hinting at the longer narrative, much like the painting itself. To end, I would like to say that the exhibition showcases a plethora of Chinese objects collected by Americans during the Gilded Age, encompassing a wide array of artifacts and photographs from the chinoiserie rooms of these mansions, as well as the Chinese tea house located here at the Marble House. Notably, the phenomenon of chinoiserie rooms extends beyond Newport. They can be discovered in Miami's Villa Vizcaya and are a recurring feature in many European palaces and gardens, a tradition with origins tracing back to the 18th century. This enduring fascination with China prompts a critical inquiry. Is this curiosity about the other rooted in genuine admiration, or does it reflect a sensationalist interest in the strange or shocking, or perhaps a complex interplay of both? Perhaps they harbor an appreciation for the bucolic and picturesque landscapes and intricate gardening traditions of China. For instance, the French dubbing the term Jardin Anglo Chinois a right nod to the English garden's admiration for Chinese aesthetics. In tandem, they express aversion to the vestiges of feudal autocracy in China. The philosophers of French Enlightenment saw wildly divergent views on China. Voltaire lauded Chinese emperor as a vast family and championed it as a global model. In stark contrast, Montesquieu depicted China as a despotic state ruled by fear. Yet the very sketches and drawings of China made by the embassy members, such as William Alexander, inspired artists such as Thomas Allen. And William Alexander's drawings inspired the romantic chinoiserie motifs that later adorned palaces such as Royal Pavilion at Brighton, England, commissioned by King George IV. Perhaps viewing China as the antipode, a locus of presumed difference, illuminates the self, contributing to the formation of self-awareness and self-satisfaction. The work we show today prompts us to reflect on this intricate web of perceptions, motivations, and interactions, and the ever-evolving narrative of global exchange. I sincerely hope you have a chance to go to the exhibition and enjoy the show as much as we enjoyed putting it together. Thank you.
Thank you both. I have to say that we've seen this several times, and every time there's something new that pops out. Thank you. I know that everyone is kind of wondering, how did you come up with the idea for the Celestial City, Nicole? I mean, what made you want to do this exhibit? Because these items are, and I love the way you've presented this, being where you have hidden stories in plain sight, which, you know, the mansions in Newport are fabulous. They're full of wonderful things, but the wonderful things are often hidden because you're so in awe of the architectural gems that surround you. And so how did you come up with this idea? How did you choose this exhibit?
Thanks for that question, Mark. You're talking about hidden stories. There were really two main hidden stories that motivated the exhibition. And the first was the story of the Chinese community of Gilded Age Newport. You know, I started this job in Newport a year and a half ago, and I was reading a lot of Newport histories and immersing myself in Gilded Age Newport history in particular. I was reading a lot about really celebrations of the diversity of Gilded Age Newport, which was home to large numbers of Irish and Portuguese and Greek and Jewish and African heritage Newporters. And it seemed like there was a missing story. I knew that Chinese immigration to Eastern cities was happening at this time. I knew that the Chinatowns of Boston and New York and Providence and Philadelphia were forming at this time. And I wondered if there was a community here in Newport. So that question was one motivating research question that drove the concept for the exhibition. And the other was the story of the tea house, really. I'd read a wonderful book by historian Kathleen Cahill called Recasting the Vote. It's about how women of color transformed the US women's suffrage movement. And Cahill writes a lot about Mabel Pinghua Lee, particularly in this moment in 1912, when American women had heard that Chinese women had gotten the right to vote, and start meeting with Mabel Lee and promoting Mabel Lee and featuring her in their parades and in their propaganda. And, I was wondering about Alva's role in all of this. I was also thinking that 1912, this is the same year Alva commissions the Chinese tea house at Marble House. So I started to explore in particular Alva's role in these meetings and in these alliances in formation. And it wasn't long before I started to find photographs of Alva with Mabel Lee and other women suffragists, other Chinese women suffragists at that seminal Pekin restaurant meeting. And then we were really off to the races with the story there. That Kathleen Cahill's very important research, allowed us to reframe the tea house as a monument to this intercultural moment of this moment of intercultural exchange that was so central to the women's suffrage movement. So really those two stories were the impetus for the exhibition.
Well, the interconnectedness of all this is really fascinating. I think it's amazing. And, speaking of Celestial City being behind you is a really quite striking background. Could you tell us about it?
Sure. Thank you, Lark, for the question. Thank you for your interest in the picture behind me. I hope it represents the Celestial City. I actually created it using generative AI. This piece was conceived with the reverence I hold for traditional Chinese landscape paintings, which in my view represent the pinnacle of Chinese art. To bring my vision of Celestial City to life, I used Midjourney, a text-to-image tool. I believe that the blend of Asian inspiration with AI can birth something uniquely beautiful. I aim to evoke a sense of mystical grandeur and transcendence, the Celestial City, by employing the traditional Chinese perspectival system technique called shenyuan, like deep distance, that you can see behind me. The kind of opens up to the moon and to kind of the picturesque landscape that is gleaming. And intertwined with elements of iconic Chinese architecture, ethereal mists, majestic mountains, and tranquil waters.
Well, you certainly also brought, I think, a new perspective for all of us about Wu Bingjian, and kind of an insight into a little bit more of his personal life. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I discovered those letters, and so through a search, this letter is housed actually in the Hong Kong Maritime Museum that I showed. And document reveals that the British were seizing American vessels, and further contains a request for the proceeds from the cargo of the leader to be directed to Wu Bingjian's representatives, James and Perkins in Boston. Notably, this letter indicates that Wu Bingjian, assisted by the Perkins, was engaging in significant independent business ventures, distinct from his primary role as a home merchant. And the historical receipt I discovered was auctioned for a sum of like $6,800 by someone called Schneibel Fine Arts, and reads that the records of It's about a receipt of about 33,000 payable in 4 months with interest from the date. And I think it's fascinating, those documents that about Wu Bingjian that we barely see before.
And I think it's fascinating that you were able to discover from those humble hexagonal Family Rose garden stools, which I think most of us would have bypassed because you have a little bit of the damage on the side and you're thinking, these are just mid-19th century. But you pulled out of that, again, hidden stories in plain sight, the connections with the Dream of the Western Chamber. What more can you tell us about things you've discovered and you've seen?
Thank you, Locke, for this question as well. So the garden seat was originally in Chateau-sur-Mer, and Nikki was the first to observe it and decided to include it in the exhibition. And the Preservation Society has a research fellow, her name is Danny Zhang, and has been diligently researching this piece. And both of us agreed in identifying the imagery on the garden seat as Xixiangji, the Tale of Western Chamber. So I have been, before this exhibition, I've been working on an article on the visualization of Tale of Western Chamber, and immediately recognized the depicted scene as being from that narrative. Specifically, the depiction of the troops battling on one side of the wall served as a crucial identification cue for me.
Well, I think it's fascinating. Now, Nikki, I just had something strike me. You showed those pictures of Vernon House with the very curious Chinese style paintings that are on the wall. And it struck me as we looked at it today for the third time, the resemblance to Chinese Coromandel lacquer screens, where you have the large center panel that might have birds and other animals, but particularly the small panels at the bottom that contain Fantastic Beast, which is almost something exclusive to those from the Kangxi period. So I'm sharing that with you again about hidden stories in plain sight. So that brings up the subject of how in the world did this fellow, a local itinerant painter, I suppose, in 1720 come into contact with that type of object, that Chinese Coromandel lacquer screen, which I suppose, or was it maybe just his creative nature?
We imagine that Coromandel screens would have been in Newport or Boston. We imagine that he also would have derived some of the scenes from prints and stories circulating at the time, like such as in newspapers about, maybe you noticed the torture scenes. There are some pretty gruesome torture scenes in the screens as well. Those are probably coming out of Western exaggerations of tortures and other atrocities in China. So really a whole amalgamation of influences.
So I'm sure everyone is kind of fascinated. They're trying to figure out, how do we get up there and what other things do you have going on? So could you tell us, how did you two get together to put this program together? How did you know each other before, or is this something that you just met over this, or how did you come into contact with each other?
Yeah, I was looking to build collaborations around this exhibition. I wanted to bring in Bing mentioned Danny. We brought on very early a young Chinese art fellow who was instrumental to completing the research for the project. As an Americanist who's been trained in 18th, 19th, early 20th century American art, I knew that I needed to partner with somebody with deep expertise in Chinese art. I found Bing, and I'm very thankful that I did. And the exhibition is really the product of our conversations. I mentioned that we were also collaborating with other scholars and with descendants and contemporary artists. The text in the exhibition, the content of the exhibition really reflects all of their input. So I would call the exhibition a real intercultural collaboration. We try to model in our scholarship, in our curatorial practice, the change we want to see in the world. So I hope if you come to Newport, you'll notice that the wall texts are not your typical museum didactic omniscient voice wall texts. Many of them are personalized. Many of them are signed. They include wall texts. Again, I mentioned contemporary artist Yuan Wu contributed not just an artwork, but an artist statement as well. We have another wonderful contemporary piece by a Chinese-American artist named Jennifer Ling Dachuk. She also contributed an artist statement to the show. We have text by Doug Chu, the great-grandson of Grace Yip Taipon, the importance of Chinese suffragists, commenting on the importance of the heirlooms that he contributed to his family. Really, this was a group effort. Bing was so essential to that, and so was everyone else. I'm really grateful for everyone's participation.
Well, and we thank you. And, you know, this is what Asia Week is about, bringing different voices together to share our experiences, our knowledge, our love for the arts of Asia. And we're glad that all of you are here. And remember, we have exhibits going on in New York. You can join Asia Week New York, so you get updates regularly. Go to our website and do the same for the Preservation Society of Newport County. Keep up with their many exhibits. There will be more coming. And we thank you from Asia Week to you. Have a good week.